Hey, thanks so much, everybody, for coming. This is a real thrill to be able to celebrate the 225th birthday of Finneytown, one of the oldest communities in all of Cincinnati. I'm Rick Kennedy. I work with Mark Evans. Where did Mark just hide? There he is. Mark, stand up, please. So the way we did this project was I did the research and the writing, and Mark did all the extraordinary, beautiful, contemporary pictures. Actually tricked the publisher by doing a lot of photos. We pretended we were old so they could get included. That was just Mark. He's from P&G. They're very clever people. So we worked together on this project, and the first thing we agreed on, we wanted to do this history of Finneytown to coincide with the project underway with the school district, the building fund. So we thought, well, we agreed right off the bat, we're not going to make a penny on this thing. Let's just do the book, and whatever we make just goes to the school district. We're thrilled. Jeff Immelt liked the idea. So he jumped in and did the forwarding. Since he's given more money than any single human being on the planet for Finneytown, we thought, well, we'll let him be in the book too, I guess. Right. Yeah. So he's in it. But really, we were very quickly over our heads because Finneytown doesn't have a public library per se or a historical society. And when we signed up with Arcadia Books, they wanted, a lot of historical photos and all those things. We're like, where on earth are we going to get them? All the photos, really, from this book came from the people in this room. I mean, the community basically did the book. All right, we did the research. I see Jeff Steele. I got stuff from him. Where's Gail? Gail, raise your hand. There's Gail right there, Gail Howard. You'll see a lot of Gail. Leslie was unbelievable. She's here somewhere hiding. We're going to learn about her father in World War II. Just everybody was involved with this program. That made it really exciting that we can do that. So what is Finneytown? We must start, what is Finneytown, right? The technical name is a census-designated place bordered by a public school district. That's what Finneytown is. Because Finneytown has this really history of a very independent streak to it. Because you'll notice this picture, the city tried 4 years in a row to annex Finneytown into the city of Cincinnati in the early 50s. And their idea was this would be the entry point to annexing all of the county through Finneytown. Well, there's Finneytown shooting the pea in Cincinnati's butt. Back in 1953, this was in the Enquirer, because Finneytown just simply didn't want to be tied into the city of Cincinnati. You'll notice all these different clips, because in 1953, they said, let's incorporate Finneytown as a village. And they had a vote, 800 people voted, and it lost by 7 votes. That's why Finneytown is not an incorporated village. It lost. They tried the next year, lost by 150. So let's call the whole thing off. Forget it. So Finneytown is what it is because every time someone tried to either annex it or incorporate it, they said, no, we're perfectly content being in Springfield Township with our own independent fire department, volunteer department, and all those things. So that's what it is. But I do bristle when people say Finneytown is just a school district. What I want to impress upon you, I hope you understand, Finneytown is a town, and it's really a super old town. The Enquirer has stories in the 1850s and 60s talking about a Finneytown near Mount Healthy. It was a town 100 years before there was a school district. In fact, as we talk about selling the frontier, and there is an actual descendant of Ebenezer Finney in the crowd tonight. That's big. Right? So how does this all happen? That's what Cincinnati looked like when Finneytown was formed, okay? So 1800, Ebenezer Finney, his wife Rachel, his son-in-law David Sprong, and the wife Lois, and Ebenezer's brother-in-law, his name was Samuel Raymond. He would end up being the blacksmith for the community. They all come from Rensselaer, New York, and they arrive by flatboat and then go up into the hills 9 miles. They take an Indian trail we now know is Winton Ridge, right? That was an Indian trail up to property at North Bend and Winton. Today's North Bend and Winton. That was the settlement created by Ebenezer Finney, thus Finneytown. You have to remember at that time, North Bend Road was one of the oldest roads in the county, so it made sense they would go there. So why did they end up there? Well, this guy, John Cleese Sims, of course, bought after the Revolutionary War, this is the spoils of war. We now own everything, right? So John Cleese Sims buys all the property between the two Miami rivers and then sells a plot of that land to an ailing elderly minister named Ebenezer Ward. And it's Ebenezer Ward then who wills the land to his grandson, Ebenezer Finney, who then takes the settlement out here when Ebenezer was about 45 years old. Now that all seems a long time ago, an old frontier town and all that, but what's cool about Finneytown is there's remnants of this frontier all over the place. Let's start first with the cemetery. Has anybody not been to the historic Finneytown Cemetery? If you haven't, you ought to. It's unbelievable. It's right next to the waterworks facility on Winton Ridge. Virtually almost all of the first settlers of Finneytown are buried there. And this was land donated by Ebenezer Finney. He donated a half an acre of his land right in the center of an ancient mound. And so it was right next to a church they also formed. They were very devout Christians, and it was called the New Light Church. And it was a sect that grew out of called the Kentucky Revival. A lot of shaking was going on. True. And so that was part of their religion, of their denomination. So when you go inside the cemetery, of course you see Ebenezer. There's his wife, David Sprong. There are several veterans of the Revolutionary War in this tiny little half-acre cemetery. There's veterans from the War of 1812 in this same site. It's a must experience. It has a cool vibe to it. So all those early settlers, Ebenezer Finney, someone said, is he a real person? He's not Paul Bunyan. So yeah, he's a real guy. Ebenezer Finney's a real dude. And so this is a beautiful scene. So Gail, who I made you point out, if you were standing on top of the Greek Orthodox Church looking out due north, right, you would see this property today. This is abuts the Warner, the Warder Nature Preserve, and Gail's land. Gail Howard, she is originally Coleman, but if you look at this property, it still looks like this today. This is where Jabez Bruin, who was a Revolutionary War soldier, he farmed this land. His son Isaac farmed it after him. He was a veteran of the War of 1812, and after him, James Wallace farmed this land. He was a veteran of the Civil War. So a lot of this frontier land is around. Oops, 1 second here. What I got here? Okay, here we go. So this is Lester Barr. Now, the Barr family, we all know the farm. Where's Mark Besserman? He's in this crowd. There's Mark. Mark is the one who's taking care of the Cardinal Conservancy because the Barr family donated their farm to the Conservancy. It has been a farm since 1804. In fact, part of the land of the Barr farm is owned by Ebenezer Finney. The barn, which is still there, you see it from when you drive on North Bend. Mark had it dated by Worcester College. It goes back to 1809. It's one of the oldest structures in the county, in Finneytown. Who knew? All right, we all know this place, right? Yes. All right, we know the Baroque violin shop. This was built around 1825. Where's Mike? Mike Arnold has been huge. So he works with he works at the shop, and he was so helpful for me and helped me understand this incredible. So this federal style building, which Paul Bartel, who opened the violin shop, he has it on the National Register. So here's the funny thing. Is that this is, of course, later on, this is the same place in the 1940s. It was a veterinary hospital. So there are changes, but then look at this building. Now, this was a photo taken 2 years ago by Mark, and he made it look like it came from the 1880s, so the publisher would accept it. He also shot the picture of the cemetery. Well, that looks like an old picture. Yeah, it was 18 months ago. Wow. So Mark's very clever. They even took the information off the back so they wouldn't know that he did it. We had to get him in, right? They wanted old. We got old. But this must have been built about the same time as the Bartel property, right? The Baroque violin shop. This is on Winton Road, just south of Compton. Where the oil change place, Valvoline shop is, right next to it. Now, this was owned by a very famous Cincinnatian. Her name was Verona Eminger. At the turn of the century, she was all over the newspapers because she was the prime suspect in the suspicious poisoning of her prominent pharmacist's husband. Now, the police couldn't find enough evidence on Verona to charge her with murder. And so she was let off, and she said, my husband, I'll never be able to replace him, she told the papers. 2 months later, she got married, moved to Phoenix. So that's where she lived. And about 3 years later, her husband shows up in the paper because she said he claimed to the county sheriff that she chased him around with a shotgun all over the backyard. And they had a dairy farm, like where Northminster parking lot is. So Verona eventually got out of the papers, and that's another place we have that's very historic. Now this is the home. Gail, were you born in this house?
Yes.
Gail was born in this house. So think of the White House farmhouse directly south of the Whitaker property. All right, so that's that. So Gail was born in this house. It was built in 1866 by James Wallace. Served in the Civil War. Was in 2 major battles against Confederate troops led by Stonewall Jackson. He was severely injured at Chancellorsville, and then when he was released, he came back, and he had this house built and a farm built, and then the Colemans, which is Gail's family, they would ultimately take over that property. So what I'm trying to show you is there's a lot of evidence of the old history of Finneytown. It's all around us. Now, this structure doesn't exist today, but you know there was the first Finneytown school was in 1860. It was like a single-story home, and a single room, schoolhouse. And then in the 1870s, they built a second one. So these are all different pictures of that school. In fact, in the 1930s, the Enquirer profiled it because there had been a subsequent school built, but it was still there. So that's the first building. But at the same time, in 1870, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd, they came. Remember, they would later be called Girlstown, this massive complex, right? Xavier High School is right across the street. They arrived in Finneytown in 1870, and they housed and educated women in troubled circumstances. And that was always an important part of Finneytown's history. There were a lot of African-American students in Finneytown in the 1870s, 80s, and 90s. They were at Girlstown being educated. And this is a shot from long ago of an extraordinary institution that the Catholics laid claim right here overlooking the Mill Creek Valley. Have to share this. Finneytown made national news in the 1890s in the old Finneytown Cemetery. John Snodgrass was a large landowner. He dies in the 1860s. Well, the cemetery started becoming a mess. No one was taking care of it. So when his wife died, the family said, we can't bury him in the old Finneytown Cemetery. Let's put him in Spring Grove. So they decided they would move John as well, move his body. So they dug up his body and they opened it up, and sure enough, they found a remarkable case of human petrification. He became known as the Stone Man. And they said, well, how on earth does this idiot son-in-law, he was a Loboido, the Loboido family over a mountain, and this idiot goes to the Enquirer and tells him about this experience of his father-in-law being dug up, and he looks like a stone man. The Enquirer writes a story about it. It shows up in every newspaper in the United States. Finneytown is on the national map for having the petrified man. All right, so let's talk about Finneytown as a country town, because you get to the turn of the century, and of course, this is amazing. 1912, 3,000 people come to Girlstown to see Archbishop Moeller, as in Moeller High School, as he dedicated the octagon-shaped chapel. And many of you remember that right across the street. 3,000 people. Then meanwhile, Finneytown. So the Finneytown Rural School District is created in 1905. In 1915, they built their first brick building. Right? At this point, Winton Road wasn't even paved yet. A lot of the kids would take ponies to school. Of course, Gail will talk a lot about her family. Was very involved in housing teachers there. This was torn down last year. Now, this was part of the original complex that would become Whitaker Elementary, and it was built all around it. So if you remember Whitaker, and you go in the middle of it, the oldest building was the 1915 building. Steve Battistone. Are you there? Is Steve Battistone here? Steve Battistone, we dedicated the book to. He was the one who found so many of these cool pictures. This is the school, the public school. I went to the 8th grade, right? And this was the school back in 1928. You had 30-some people. Then this is a guy named Telford Whitaker. Many of you already know him. He arrives in 1930. He comes to the school as a coach and a teacher. He was at UC, where he was a college athlete, quite a baseball player. And in fact, he would coach all the teams, and they had great basketball teams that went to county prominence through Telford. And also, he had a semi-pro baseball team. He's always in the news. You look in the paper in the 30s and 40s, Telford Whitaker and his baseball teams. But when he started there, they had 45 students at Finneytown School. And when he retired in 1965, there were 3,000 students in the Finneytown School District. So he was the superintendent and one of the most important people in Finneytown history. The Finneytown Inn has a great history. This is kind of where the Black Castle is today. The White Castle painted black. It's kind of where that is. All right, so that's where the old Finneytown Inn. So the Finneytown Inn was the place in the 30s, 40s, 50s, up until 1960. This was the place that you hung out. They had a dance floor, lots of great whiskey. Whenever a politician came to town, they spoke here, school meetings. So it started as a saloon in 1850 using the bricks of the foundation of the New Light Church that Ebenezer Finney founded. That's how historic it was. But unfortunately, when they rerouted Winton Road straight up the hill from Winton Place, they had to tear it down. So a second Finneytown Inn shows up, and it lasts for about 14 years. But that was the original Finneytown Inn, and that was the place in Finneytown. Now, the community also takes on a unique feel and look by the 1920s because of two massive nurseries. One was the Neiman Nursery. The Anthony and Mary Neiman came from the west side, and they owned an extraordinary amount of property on both sides of Winton Road. Of course, they sold the property, or may have donated the property, for St. Vivian's. But their property went all the way down to Galbraith, which is called Van Zandt then, and you go to the west to Daly. So the Neiman Nursery was massive, and over time was developed into some beautiful homes and streets in Finneytown. The other is the Warder Nursery. And there's we have a lot of photos in the book from Warder. The city parks were really super helpful in finding some unique vintage pictures. I mean, they had like 18 to 19,000 trees at a given time. It was huge. And for many years, Mr. Burke, did you guys know Mr. Burke? Where's his son? He's here. There he is. Donnie, right? So Donnie, every time I get these pictures from the parks, I'm like, who on earth are these people? I call Donnie. Oh yeah, that's so-and-so. Yeah, he was in trouble there. So the Burkes lived in the house there. They had a house as a superintendent you were housed in. So they had 13 kids, 12 kids in that house. So Harvey Burke was the longtime superintendent. That's him right here. And so everybody remembers him. I tell you, I had a lot of help from his son. So the first subdivision, because you had water that had to go into the Warder Nursery, a water system, it was only natural they built the real first true subdivision in Finneytown, was the Parkview Heights subdivision. Sold on and being one of the tallest highest points in the county, they had fresh air. That was the main selling point, fresh air. Because you think about it, you go down the hill and all the smog of the city. So that was it. And so this starts in 1937. They would build these 5 streets in Parkview Place. And then I've driven by this building forever, the Mayor building, which was, I always wondered, what is the story behind the Mayor? Now, we knew the Mayor company, they were wholesalers of school equipment. So they moved into this in the 60s and 70s. But look in front, there's a monument to the veterans, the World War II veterans of Parkview Heights. So I had to go find this out, so I did some fun research. 1941, this was basically their mini mall at Parkview Heights. Had a beauty salon, general store, grocery, apartments on the top. Then there was a young Catholic congregation that was being formed at that time from Parkview Place, and the Richter family that owned the building encouraged them to hold their masses in the basement, right? And so the congregation was so appreciative of the Richters, they asked, who would you like to name our new parish when we established one? Well, they had a daughter named Vivian. Hence, there you have it. You heard it here. Well, maybe not first. So that's why we have St. Vivian's. It's because of the Richter family and the encouragement. So that all occurred in this building. This was like the community center at one time of Finneytown. So this is just a quick aerial view of the early 50s. I don't know if you can see it too well, but you see 2 developments. You see this is the Parkview Heights right here, and then you got View Place that was started. That was one of the early subdivisions, the View Place. There was a lot of development going on here. This is the fire map when the Northern Hills Fire Department was created in the mid-40s. There's just nothing in Finneytown. It was just so rural. You know, this is the development of, that's your Parkview. And then up here is Beta in that area. That was kind of it. You know, it had not gone completely crazy. In fact, this is a view, an aerial. That's someone here who just has the original photo. This is Winton Road, going down the bottom here. This is where Kroger and where the shopping center, the shopping plaza would be, right here. That was the Clearview Stables. They had riding stables. In the 50s, Mr. Hafer bought this large tent, military tent, and that's kind of where Playhouse in the Park got started, because they would do the plays there in the summer, and kids could, they could fish in the pond, and they had all these horse shows all the time. You look at the old papers from the 50s. I mean, this place, the Clearview Stables, were just constant in the newspapers because of all the different things they did with equestrian there. Finneytown starts getting developed by the 30s and 40s. All right, so we'll start first with the Niemans. So the Niemans began selling property. If you think of the house as just west of Winton Road on Galbraith, it was Van Zandt, those big, large homes, early 30s vintage. That was part of the Nieman property they started selling. Then they created, in the 40s, they created North Hill Lane. Right, so this is one of the houses on North Hill Lane. So that was going on in the 40s. At the same time, there was a company called Hollyhock Farms, right? And so this is an original sign from Hollyhock Drive found in the garage of none other than Clay Mizell. And then we put it on a telephone pole. Mark made the picture look old. Voila! The original street sign of Hollyhock. Yes. There you have it. We can't claim that thing there. I think that was probably from 2018, but we don't know. So they were starting to develop Finneytown, because everything changes after World War II. All right. This is the boom time. All the troops come home from World War II, from the Korean War. They're educated on the GI Bill. They're getting married. They're having kids. This is where Finneytown really transforms. All right, the first step was the development by modern builders. Modern builders owned more than 1,400 acres right around Hempstead and that area, and they established an area. They built tract homes. It was called Brentwood Village. Beautiful Brentwood Village. That GI. I mean, they had the wonderful young American home with GE appliances. Right, you had it all. Don't fail to see it. It was amazing. These homes are, they're over 70 years old now. This is Melody Lane. This is the cul-de-sac. You go down. I looked at the house 2 days ago. It looks great. These houses were indestructible. These were fantastic. Modern builders. All the housing stock in Finneytown is really good. I've talked to a lot of realtors and doing this book, Mark and I did. Housing stock in Finneytown is out of control. It's so impressive how well these homes were built. So that was one of the very first developments, was what we called then Brentwood Village. If you were looking at Kirkland and Burgundy, that would be called the Thompson Acres, Thompson Builders. This is an original brochure of these spectacularly cool mid-century houses. When the county finally fixed the roads on this, these streets are going to take off, because this is beautiful architecture. Very popular with young people now. So that was Thompson Acres at Kirkland and Burgundy. Now Thompson then claims its stake on the other side of Winton. This is the corner of Empire Court and Renard. The house is still, that was the model home for Brentwood Acres, right? Let's don't get too creative. So we had Brentwood Village and we had Brentwood Acres, which runs right up against Hollyhock Farms, all right? So things are shaping up very quickly. Now, what's interesting about the Thompson homes is, if you think about, they had a lot of traditional Cape Cods, and they also did the designs with the giant front carports, right? You see on Pringle. They're awesome, right? Empire Court. These are really cool architectural designs. They really are unique. And so that was a very hot, and of course what was really big at that time was what was become very revolutionary in the early 50s was glass sliding door onto a patio. It was big. So that was a very important feature in these homes. This is an aerial because modern builders then moves further north, and this is Fountainwood with the classic California suburbans, right? There was a guy named Don Scholes. He was an architect who was nationally influential, who had a lot of designs in Finneytown. Finneytown has some of the coolest housing stock around. And Mark and I, that's kind of what we had so much fun with. It's just, and we're going to see a lot of Mark's cool pictures. So this is Fontainebleau with all the those classic suburbs. And then the Lang brothers was another developer, and they were in the southern part of Finneytown. Think about west of Winton, called Greenfield Village. Greenfield Village. And as time went on, the houses got really upscale. They start getting, this is Springbrook. This was a picture taken, I told the publisher, back in the early 60s. I don't know why this antenna is here. That must have been Mark photoshopped. You didn't have to modernize the picture, Mark. But anyway, this one of Mark's pictures are so cool. So we had more fun. But you notice the treatments. So Lang Brothers, you can always tell a Lang Brother house because they usually have 3 or 4 different kind of materials in the front. They're spectacular. They're also on timber trail. This is why Finneytown's awesome, because we have really good housing stock, and that's going to do. Oh, this is going to do well for us. Okay. Oh, we know. Does anybody know Merce Hershey, right? So Merce is down in the southwest corner. That was the Allen Construction Company. Did all the Cape Cod. So Mark and I went to see Merce because she had the original sign that was in the front yard of her house when she bought it in the 1950s. And so we get there, and Mercer's got this. She was 97 then, so was she 98, 99 now, 99. So she's all concerned looking, and her son's all concerned. We're like, what's wrong? We can't find the sign. We can't find it. Why? You can't find the sign. We're here. The sign was holding up the Christmas tree. It was on the floor of the Christmas tree. Once they realized that, we moved that out, and we got this awesome picture. Look at that. 4 bedrooms, 2 baths, under $22,000. All right, Wittendale. Where are the houses right behind Graders? And now this led to a controversy because they developed Wittendale, and they had a North Hill Lane going through Wittendale. There was a North Hill Lane on the other side. Well, the people with the elegant houses on the west side of North Hill Lane did not like the idea of a North Hill Lane cutting through little tract houses on the other side. They got the county commissioners involved. The county commissioners changed the name on the Wittendale side to South Hill Lane. And then they got all furious and said, wait a minute, what are you changing our? Change their name. So finally the commissioners just threw their hands up, and we have North Hill Lane on both sides. Those are the tract homes that are in Wittendale. Of course, everything was booming at that time. I mean, in 1959, like over half the population of Finneytown was under 20 years old. They're all kids, right? The churches are booming. So you have, this is Northminster, this is the second chapel. They already outgrown their first chapel. So this is 19, look at, Lassie was there too. This was the second chapel because they'd already outgrown the first. At that time, they had 1,300 members. This is Faith Lutheran, and this is their celebration of their expansion in 1963. Way back in the back here is Daily Donuts. And of course, this was featured in the Inquirer. This is St. Vivian's. I mean, St. Vivian's, of course, had, was massively large. Steve Baston found me this picture. This is the shopping mall. In 1958, when the Finneytown Boosters were founded, and they had a big gathering fundraiser, at the shopping plaza. The fire department is really an important part of Finneytown history. Okay, they had a volunteer Northern Hills Fire Department, volunteer department, that contracted through the township, which is one of the reasons why it wasn't incorporated. Because they felt like, why do we need to be incorporated? We got a perfectly functioning school, and we have our own fire department that does just great. And Nat Bond was the chief. I don't know if anybody knew Nat Bond. I mean, he was a legend, right? So he trained all those young guys like Jeff Steele, volunteer fire, right? There you are. And this is Leroy Weber, who did the emergencies. And if you look here, these little storks, they kept storks on the side of the car because that's how many babies were born in the ambulance. They put them on the side. I love this picture from 1963. It's amazing. If you look at this picture, you say, well, they're on some side street. That is the parking lot of Chipotle, because the fire department, of course, had the station right there where Chipotle is. This little sleepy street over here is Winton Road, and from the top of this thing, he could have thrown a rock onto Ronald Reagan Highway from there. It just shows you how much Finneytown changed radically and very quickly. Of course, where you're sitting right now, in 1956, was part of Ivel Goodman's golf range. Ivel Goodman was a star in the 1940 Reds that won the World Series against the Tigers. Longtime Reds beloved player. And he opens a golf range on this property, all the way across down through here. And then in 1960, most of the property was cut out for the Brentwood Bowl that opened. It was open, over 60-some years? And at the opening night, they brought all these famous professional bowlers in. Wade Hoyt was the host of it. Happening place then, happening place now. This is a sad picture. I know Gail kind of claimed like she really didn't go there much. This is the Arabian Lounge. The Arabian Lounge featured dancing girls in cages and then snake dancing ladies. So the hip people in Finneytown in the early 60s were at the Arabian Lounge. And unfortunately, in 1967, there was a fire in the Arabian Lounge right next to the Brentwood Bowl would be no more. Gail said she said the food was really good. All right. We all know Tiny Town, right? Who doesn't know Tiny Town? Right on Galbraith, right? And I was looking for, I had pictures of the Brentwood Swim Club, and they weren't, they all looked the same. But I thought it'd be more cool, the coveted red duck and white duck. You needed the red duck in order to have access to the deep end. It was like having a passport. Huge. So there we are from that. All right, now let's talk about the schools, right? The school district, I said it's the town, but it's also, right, it's fundamental to the school district. In the 50s, Finneytown had some of the best 8th grade teams around. Okay, so here we can introduce a real icon. That is Mac McNulty. And he was a naval officer during World War II who comes to the district in 1947 as a coach and teacher at Finneytown School. Now, working together with Telford Whitaker, quite the athlete and coach himself, they had all kinds of extraordinary, I'm going to turn this off, I don't know why I'm getting bothered here, sorry. So they had these great teams. This team won the county tournament in 1955. This is one of Whitaker's sons who was a star. Whitaker also had a son who played on an undefeated Finneytown team, and then he later played with Oscar Robertson at UC. So these were powerhouse teams. But this is a school now on the cusp of a huge change, right? Because in the 50s, the state said either you offer high school or we're going to make you consolidate. So eventually they had to think about that. This is the 1957 class at Finneytown School. This would be the last class that had to go high school elsewhere. It's really kind of weird because they built the high school in stages. So the 58 class, they could start their freshman year as the high schools be built in stages. This was the last class that graduated that had to go high school either at Mount Healthy, or if you're a basketball player, you went to Hughes. So here we are. So the new school, mid-century modern, you can tell it's already a big part of the theme. We have some of the coolest architecture. So to build the new high school, the district hired a nationally renowned architect named Woody Garber. And Woody Garber, shortly before doing that design, had been featured in Time and Newsweek magazine for designing the downtown library. He also designed the library. And he also, Saunders Hall, remember UC that was imploded? That was Woody Garber's as well. His daughter has written a book about him called Implosion. Troubled life, but amazing architect. And this was very revolutionary. The Finneytown High School was like an open campus, like a college campus, single story, lots of glass. Very interesting. So this is a construction shot, so you can see the idea. He had this concept of an open campus for the high school. And so Woody was, he had a long-time firm in Cincinnati. He was very successful. But he was almost too clever for his own good, because about 6 months into the construction of the high school, the state stopped the building. They said, this thing is too radical. It has too much glass in the hallway. They actually hauled it. The district had to hire Carl. They had to hire the county prosecutor, at that time was Carl Rubin, to fight the case for Finneytown with the state. They said, well, you've violated some building codes here. But you couldn't find it. So construction then resumed, but it stopped for a while because it was a very radical design. He did Indian Hill and Finneytown about the same time. They were featured all over the United States in different architectural magazines because it was very unique. I like that picture here from the 50s. The cars changed, but the building still looks the same. Same time. So Finneytown's created in 1958. Boom. One of the biggest decisions in Finneytown history. The Jesuits moved Xavier High School. Been around since 1831. I think I have that right. Someone can dare correct me. They moved to Finneytown, right? And they said because one of the fastest growing areas. So they moved right across the street from Girlstown, right? So this is the actual groundbreaking ceremony. You have folks from the Archdiocese. You know, we're in full regalia there, doing the first spade of dirt, and there it is under construction. So this was an extraordinary moment for Finneytown, and really influenced the population of the community with such an impressive school in the area. Things kept growing. an architect named Russell Champlin. He was a protege of Woody Garber, designs both Cottonwood, 1962, and Brent in 1964. So now this whole mid-century look from the actual residential spreads into the buildings that we have for schools. We put this in for fun. That's the original St. Vivian's. All right, they had a little facade and with a Quonset hut. They had a Quonset hut that they would temper. They put a facade on the front of it before it was built. So that's not in the book because they rejected it. Bill Schwartzel, was he here? There he is. Where is he? There he is. All right. So when the high school gets formed, they made three really important hires. They made Mac McNulty the first athletic director, right, to build the football programs and all the different sports programs. Then they hired Telfer Whitaker to be the superintendent, and they hired Bill Schwartzel from Dayton, UC graduate. I love this story about driving up Winton Ridge. He sees the Finneytown Inn, and this is the 50s, right? He sees all the cows everywhere. He says, this is God's country. And there it was. So he began developing all the programs beginning in the mid-50s before the whole high school was completed. So Bill Schwartzel, he retired in 1983? 6, close, okay. So he was an institution, right? And the football team got really good too. Thank you, Jeff Steele, for this wonderful program. Undefeated in 1969, correct? 9-1. Won the league, right?
Yeah.
Yes. So the football programs got really impressive. Meanwhile, over at Xavier, Bill Keating and Charlie Keating, who lived on Green Farms, they fund the money for the natatorium, one of the coolest swimming facilities in the state. And his dream was to get the National AAU Amateur National Championships held in that natatorium, and he got it done in 1970. Mark Spitz actually came over from IU, swam, and then raced back to do a chemistry test. There were several Olympians there, and of course over time at House Olympians like Joey Hudipole, and just think about all the state championships at Xavier High School. It's extraordinary in swimming. So it's really a very, very important facility in our history. Of course, these are also two really important photos of the early days, because this presentation ends around 1970. We had to end in a spot, so that's why we wanted to focus on how Finneytown was born. And this takes us kind of the end of the school. This is the two coaches. Balaban was the coach of the football team, and Xavier's the field's named after him. And then we have Coach Burning on the right. When he retired, he'd won more high school basketball games than any coach in Greater Cincinnati history. The gym's named after him. And of course, the SAY program, which was the youth soccer program, was formed in Finneytown. It's a national organization, but it started in Finneytown in 1967. So you have all these young kids playing soccer in Finneytown, so when it finally became an organized sport at the high school level, it was lights out. So Finneytown wins the 1974 state championship. The next team loses in like the divisional finals, but they had won 3 years. They were undefeated for 3 years. Then come back and win in 1976 and then later. So you talk about a complete awesome dynasty. They were like the Red Stockings, that never lost, the Cincinnati Red Sox. They won, I think they won 40 straight matches till they lost. So quite a dynasty. And of course, that ended with with our Whitaker School. So that covers this. The thing about Whitaker was torn down. You think about it. There was a school building there since 1860. They've been educating kids there for well over 100 years. So it's quite a landmark. It's one of those things that we hate to see go. Here's one of the fun sections. Mark and I had fun. These are mostly Mark's pictures. It's the mid-century, because Finneytown was built in such a compressed time, right? Early 50s into the mid-60s. And the raise of that time was mid-century. When you think of mid-century architecture, single story, low to the ground, lots of glass, angular roofs, lots of space, the Frank Lloyd Wright influence. And we haven't, in Finneytown and Wyoming are just hotbeds of this kind of architecture. One was the topography we have, and the second was just UC professors. There were a lot of modernist architects came out of UC, and in those days in the 50s, they were celebrities. This is the couple. They're called the News. This is the News. They live on the end of Long Lane, and this is some of the early mid-century where they would use an oversized roof with a pole and a little bit of concrete, and boom, instant patio. And these are a couple others of the early ones. Mark took this back in 1956, 18 months ago. And then this is Fontainebleau, and then this is Kirkland. Again, this is the Don Scholl. He was a very influential architect. And then they start getting more upgraded with a guy named Rudy Hermes. He was a very important architect in the city. Rudy Hermes. This is a house situated right off of Renard, and it's right next door to Charlie Harper, who also had his house designed by Rudy Hermes in this really cool mid-century architecture. Look at this Dan Merkel house. Isn't this amazing? This is Hollyhock. Two separate structures connected by a single roof with a hole in the middle that can allow rain to go into a little garden. So these were really, really, Merkel was a very influential architect who taught at UC. Dean View Place, right in View Place, is probably the epicenter of mid-century modern homes in Finneytown. These are just two examples on the street. Mark got a little artsy-fartsy on us here. But they're cool. I mean, they're just amazing homes. And so if you really want to see the epicenter of that architecture, go over to View Place and just drive down Dean View, and you'll just be amazed at all these. These are all early 60s vintages. And it affected the commercial. So did any of you have Ray Lippert as your doctor? Yep. Oh, y'all did, right? So you had the house built, right? And you have his office built in Hempstead. You go to Ray Lippert's, you have a sore throat, and it's like, why are you giving me a physical? You always got a physical, right? I don't get that, why that was. But it's fascinating, you do that. And then this is so then it's been since restored. It's an architectural, an accounting firm. Yeah. Just beautiful, beautiful. And the inside is stunning. We have pictures in the book. And of course the old laundromat, right? Built 1960 on Wynn Road. Look at that crazy roof. This was called Googie architecture, named after the Googie Cough House in Hollywood. And so this whole look, this early atomic age look, right, the early 60s, we have it in Finneytown, which is a very rare piece of architecture. Don Lang was really important to development in Finneytown. So you had the Lang brothers. Then Don Lang, with his family, he lived in the giant A-frame house on Green Farms. And he was working for his father and his uncle. They were Lang brothers. And he felt like he could do better on his own. So he broke off of Lang brothers, teams up with Nettie Neiman. She was running the Neiman Nursery. And they developed what we call North Hill Estates. So that is going up Green Farms, Spruce Glen, Pine Glen, Finney Trail, all those beautiful homes. And Don's concept was to have individual builders and architects, so everything looks different. So Don was very, very important in developing that section of Finneytown. One of the homes in Don Lang's development, of course, was John Wilkie's extraordinary Art Deco house. So Mark's going to talk about that in a little bit. One of the coolest, mid-century, one of the coolest mid-century homes in all of Cincinnati. And of course, this is a house for Dr. Feldhaus. This is on Green Farms in Spruce Glen. These are amazing structures. This is on the end of a really happening street called Blue Crystal. Very happening. And at the end of the cul-de-sac, that's Bert Lewis, who we always, if we could find people with the drawings, we'd have them hold. And so he fell in love with this place. And Mark's going to talk about him a little bit later. This one's incredible. So this is the hexagon, yellow-shaped hexagon house, also on the National Register. This is Benjamin Dunbar. He was an architect, grew up, went to Hughes High School, lived with Frank Lloyd Wright for several years, comes and forms an architectural firm in Cincinnati, buys this property along Galbraith Road, right along the Stone Creek through there, spends 10 years. He not only designed it, he also built it. That's a picture of on the left. He built this thing. It's all held up with these iron spikes, and you see Mark shot this picture to show how in the spirit of Frank Lloyd Wright, he built this house to kind of match the contour. He took a lot of the stones from the creek and has them built. He has a fireplace in there and different flooring from it. Just an extraordinary home. It fell on bad times. The Dunbars lived there till 2006, and by 2015, 2016, the house was falling apart. He was in trouble. So Beth Johnson, who a Cincinnati resident, bought the home, got on the National Register, and she spent years and years restoring it. You can see it pretty clear now if you pull off the exit across county. It's round to your right. One of the coolest things. And then this is a house on Commonwealth. And there was a guy named Raymond Dudley who lived in this briefly in the early 60s. And he was a classical concert pianist in Cincinnati and toured the world. So this is his place, and he had a grand piano there. And we have a couple, or a dentist couple that lived in this house and been there for 50 years. And so they've taken such beautiful care of that house. I'm going to take a second now, and I'd like Mark, would you like to do it later? We'll keep talking.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'll keep going. Okay. Let's talk about, I'm on a roll. All right, let's talk about some notable people. Okay, we're going to finish with some notable people, and then Mark's going to talk. We have some really notable people in Finneytown. This is Henry Strecker, Leslie's mother. Henry's mother, where's Leslie? I thought I saw Leslie. There she is in the back, all right? It's Leslie Strecker. She wrote this book about her father, this breathtaking. So her father, Henry, grew up in the Baroque violin shop building, all right? He was a Boy Scout. He enters the service. He has to be the most decorated veteran, war veteran from Finneytown. He earned a Purple Heart, though he's wounded several times. He earned a Bronze Star, and he earned 5 Silver Star Battle Stars. He was in the D-Day invasion. He was in the Battle of the Bulge. The book is extraordinary. This just came out, and it's really someone who should not be forgotten. He went to Finneytown School through the 8th grade, and then, of course, in those days, you didn't have a high school, so he went on to Mount Healthy. But Henry Strecker is an extraordinary man, and he lived with the memories of that war. It never left him. And his daughter, Leslie, in the back, spent much of her life writing this, compiling this. The book is detailed. It's just an amazing thing. If you're interested in it, I have an address where you can order if you're interested in buying it. Henry Strecker is one of our great notables in Finneytown. Another notable is, of course, Pringles. It's not urban myth. It's a fact. This guy named Gerard Gendell, he was a brand manager living in Wyoming for Procter & Gamble. He was charged with the marketing of what we would call Pringles. And the agency, he would drive through Finneytown. He would carpool through Finneytown to go to the R&D center, which was really close to us, where they were developing Pringles. Pringles were invented by Dr. Fred Bauer from College Hill, who's buried in Pringle cans at Arlington Cemetery. True story. True story. So he is. And so Fred Bauer designed the first saddleback chip and also designed the container. But it was Mr. Gendel, he was given the proposal from the agency to call them wrinkles. And he thought about that, and he basically said, I'm going to do an alliteration of it, because he liked the name Pringle from Pringle Drive. And then we have Mr. Pringle and the whole thing. So it's not an urban myth. It's true. Pringles are named after Pringle Drive. And these are two notables in the Reds world. Okay, on your left you have Bubbles Hargrave. They call him Bubbles because he had a stutter, and of course back then we weren't sensitive, we were just cold people. And he just lived with it, Bubbles Hargrave. He was one of the best hitting catchers in the history of the Cincinnati Reds. He won the batting title, I think he hit 365 in 1926, something like that. But he was a phenomenal hitter for the Reds, and played a long baseball career, then lived in Parkview Heights, where he worked for a valve company. So he lived in Finneytown a very long time. And of course, Gordy Coleman, everybody knows Gordy Coleman, right? He moved to Finneytown in 1963 on Burgundy. And my wife, Jane, she scored this as a little kid because kids would knock on his door and he'd always have a picture waiting right sign him. And Gordy was just a wonderful guy. Lived in Finneytown. They moved to Zenith. His son was a great athlete at the high school. Yeah, I was a young reporter when Gordy was the PR guy. We just thought he was the coolest dude because he always wore a red sport coat and a cigarette in his hand. He was just wonderful, wonderful human being. And he just died. He left us way too early. But Gordy Coleman, great first baseman for the Reds. Rod Serling was born in New York State, serves in the war, saw tremendous, tough action in the Pacific. And like Henry Strecker, had to live with the horrors of that all the time. On the GI Bill, he goes to Antioch College, where he met his wife, Carolyn. And then they moved to Cincinnati to work with WLW in 1950. So he worked with WLW. By 1951, he has a live drama series called The Storm that aired locally on WKRC. It was filmed live from the Time Star building at Broadway and 8th Street, the cool Art Deco building. And so Rod Serling was very actively involved early on in doing teleplays because you remember the golden age of television in the 50s, all these live dramas, and he was writing for them. So he moves to Finneytown. It was called Wyoming Heights then on Long Lane, about halfway down to the left. He was here just a little over 2 years, but during that time he wrote 3 really important things. He wrote Patterns, which was a teleplay that won an Emmy for him, later was made into a major motion picture, wrote that living on Long Lane with his 2 kids. The guy worked nonstop. He also wrote something called Twilight Rounds. Gotcha. Twilight Rounds. Twilight Rounds won an Emmy. It was about an aging boxer, and that was later made into a movie with Anthony Quinn called Requiem for a Heavyweight, also written while he was living in Vietnam. Then he writes this pilot idea called the time element. The concept was a guy that keeps dreaming in his dream that the Japanese invade Pearl Harbor, and he's trying to warn them and no one listens. Sounds like the Twilight Zone. So when he left Finneytown in late 1954, he continued to refine this concept of the time element. It was first a local drama, it was on the radio, it was done by Desilu Studios, and finally it was viewed as the pilot for his wildly successful Twilight Zone series that ran from 59 to 64. This is his house. That's what it looked. This was in the newspaper. So when Rod bought the house on Long Lane, he was already a bit of a celebrity because locally, I mean, he had his own locally produced drama, and there was a lot of news around the plays that he was writing that were appearing nationally on live broad television. Now, I was very lucky in the 80s to interview his next door neighbor. So everybody described Rod as kind of a very friendly workaholic. He never slept. And so at night, in those days, you didn't have air conditioning on Long Lane, so the neighbor right next to him, he and his wife would lay in bed and they could hear his typewriter coming from this window, Mark highlighted it for us, and they could smell his cigarettes and his coffee all night long. He just worked constantly. Rod died at age 50 on the operating table, from the lifestyle he lived. And of course, he became a major franchise. He had all kinds of things. He comes back to Cincinnati in 1964 to give a talk. He'd won 5 Emmys by then. And a lot of his conversation was how he really missed the days of being a young, struggling writer living in Finneytown. And for all the success he had, because some of the most important things he wrote living here. 2 people on Pine Glen. In fact, we have some of the residents of the house. It's 6 o'clock in the tri-state. Al Shalikati was already a well-known columnist at the Enquirer in the 50s. And then he finally he had a WSAI news spot, and then in 1960, he becomes the anchor with WCPO, and he dominated the airwaves. I mean, it's unbelievable. He was so popular that he actually had a bit part in a Gunsmoke episode because they were trying to use that to build ratings around different communities. He was such an institution. Right across the street from him was John Wilkie in the extraordinary house we had, who had a tremendous influence on the Right to Life movement. His writings were read by millions around the world. Extraordinarily influential guy. Here he's with John Paul II, and his legacy will live on. A couple fun ones here. So we have, when we were playing the music as you were coming in, the one with the really bad Farfisa organ, that was the Us Two group. There on the left, that's Len Gardner, who went to Xavier High School. The other kids all went to Finneytown High School. Some of you guys may know Joe Madrigal. He's up on the top left. Very good guitar player, still performing today. That's the Us Two group. They actually had a regional hit in 1967. On the bottom is a group called Madison Incorporated. These are high school kids except for this little dude right here. That's Mike Bainey. And his bass is just about as big as he is. Of course, Mike Benny would be a very beloved musician. This is my brother-in-law, Bill. There he is. And there's that Farfisa organ everybody had back then. So that's Madison. And Mike Benny would go on to have a group. Remember Wheels. Wheels was a very popular group. And Mike was murdered downtown. Was it 2010, I think. But super, super musician. Really a beloved guy. All right. I always say the best for last, right? Charlie Harper. Charlie Harper was born and raised in rural West Virginia. And then he goes to the Art Academy in Cincinnati where he meets his wife, Edie. She's also a well-accomplished artist. Just like Henry Strecker, just like Rod Serling, Charlie Harper goes to the war as a reconnaissance team in Europe, drawing maps and that type of thing. He saw untold horror in the war. And like those other 2 guys, he had to live with it his whole life. In fact, his son told me that he said, I think the reason he drew all the time was to get his mind off the war. It just never left him. So he comes back from the war. He finishes at the college. and by the early 50s moves to Finneytown. All right, so what's he doing? He's teaching at the college. He's also illustrating books, Betty Crocker books. He did over 1,200 works for a magazine called the Ford Times. It was a consumer magazine Ford Motor Company put out, and they encouraged him to sell his signed prints in the magazine. You could get a signed print from Charlie Harper for $4.95, right? And so he sold them through that, and this makes him kind of a national figure. You know, he was very prolific, and then he was contracted out for any number of institutions, whether it was Cincinnati Parks or whoever. I mean, he was very, in his unique artwork, you know, the minimalist, telling a story of nature through minimalist art. So there he is later in his life in his house. His son provided these pictures. So just don't tell people exactly where they live because everybody just keeps pulling down there all the time. But I think all of you know. If you want to know, just ask me later. So that's Charlie, a lady in their life. This is their son, Brett. They had one son. He graduated from Finneytown High School. Very accomplished artist himself. He's also been very active in the legacy, right? So he's been involved in, you know, Charlie Harper, everything, right? Whether it's Christmas ornaments or, you know, you name it, it's on. It's really expanded the name of Charlie Harper. Now they're doing exhibits in Europe, and I think the day will come. They're working really hard to have one of his early paintings appear and to be a part of the permanent collection at the Cincinnati Art Museum. When they do his exhibits there, it's one of the most successful things they do. So extraordinary legacy. In the township, we talked earlier about the Warder, you know, Reserve and what the township has done to protect that gorgeous place. They also gave us the ultimate gift on Winton Galbraith, right? So Micah Sanders, who's a well-known artist, was the one that designed this concept. I don't know about you guys, there's been a couple close callers. I mean, you drive the car and then you keep looking over to make sure the whole thing appears. And, you know. So if you want to see him clearly, just go over to British Petroleum and stand on the corner amid all the chaos. You can look straight at the cardinal, and he's looking right at you. So what a spectacular, he lived in Finneytown over 50 years. You know, so we do, in an area less than 5 square miles, you know, we have an internationally known artist, internationally known writer, right? And later on, of course, we had 2 Olympic champions, Amanda Borden, we had Joey Hudipole, we have Jeff Immelt, you know, retired chairman of GE. I mean, you have this extraordinary legacy in this really, really tiny area. Now, I'd like to pass this over to Mark. I want him to share a couple of stories. I've been doing all the blabbing. And Mark did all the photo taking and trying to keep me in line. And he wants to share a couple of these things.
So, a couple of just quick points. When I started doing this, I wasn't, you know, I thought Rick just was going to have me go around and take pictures of a few houses around Finneytown. It wound up being a lot more than that.
Closer, you need to be closer.
Closer, okay.
You need to be in front of the camera.
Got it. Let me move over here anyway. So that way I can displace Rick. This is the Harper House, and Rick and I went and visited Tyson Hermes, who's Rudy's son, and he has a construction company over in Northern Kentucky. And so behind all these pictures and these really cool buildings, there's always a people behind it that's so interesting. So it turned out he had this great story that when the house was being designed, they took the plans and went to get a mortgage on it, okay? And they walked in and, you know, I guess had left the plans and so forth. And so evidently the bank didn't really like it. And they told him, we really can't, this is just too out there. This is too avant-garde for us to finance this house. And they walked out and Hermes, the architect, said to Harper, gee, I'm sorry, you know, this is too extreme. And he goes, oh no, this means we're on the right track. and you know, so we had these other examples where people just have cared so much for these houses. Jack Wilkie had him also design their house, and Tim and Amy have done just a phenomenal job of restoring it and caring for it and bringing it back to, you know, its glory, really. But they were able to describe to us, you know, what they had learned about the house and how, you know, Jack Wilkie had like talked to the architect, and he wanted a house that really felt like a lodge, that felt like places they had visited and so forth. And the care that went into that design, and then that Tim and his wife have really just done a phenomenal job of really creating an interior that reflects what that house was like, how it was designed, and so forth. It just really reflects how people don't just see these things as houses or whatever. They're just really well cared for, and between the architects who really poured a lot of thought into them, and then the owners who've really taken care of them, is really, you know, some neat stories. You know, Rick talked about the Dunbar house. Turns out he was actually the younger brother of an older guy who was also an architect. They both were at UC. He was a professor for many years. But the thing that Rick didn't mention was he actually was the apprentice for Frank Lloyd Wright when Falling Waters was being built. And so when you see the creek that runs down behind the house, you can think about that. Really a neat story. And Beth has just done a phenomenal job of restoring that place and taking care of it, getting it recognized, and so forth. So it's just really cool to think about how these houses aren't just the houses and the structures and the coolness of it. Bert described when he was looking at houses in the area and stuff, he just fell in love with the back of this house. So this is the house at the end of Blue Crystal. It's this white, very contemporary house. But the back of it is what's so cool because it's got this great patio for entertaining, and that just sold Bert on the place. So we could go on and stuff. I won't talk about it anymore. This is another just great house. It's been super well cared for. So we just really appreciate you all listening to us. Rick can answer questions because he knows way more about all this stuff than I do, and so forth. So yeah.
I'm just so glad you guys all came. I mean, I think what we wanted to do with this is, Arcadia does a beautiful job of doing nostalgia books, right? But we just kind of fought them all the way because we said nostalgia is important, but Finneytown today has all kinds of unique assets, you know, these residential and commercial structural assets. And so we wanted to put a lot of focus on the buildings of it because that is a tremendous strength for the community going forward. It's how people are attracted to